Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is the last time you will hear me say this little paragraph of reminders. My name is Rachel Johnston, and I'm the BWC TTA Program Manager. Our next session is the evolution of BWC and other technology, changes and lessons learned. Thank you so much, everyone, for your attention and for making this such a great national meeting. I'm going to now turn the session over to Shelley Solomon. Shelley?
Good afternoon. I'm excited that everyone is here today. I see we have a lot of participants. So just as an overview, I'm going to introduce the panelists. The format today will be question and answer. I will be asking the panelists questions and hopefully they'll be providing some answers. We will have questions that we will ask you as participants, and hopefully you'll participate in our polls. And then we will have a time for you to ask questions, and I encourage you to ask questions. This is for you, so please use this format. Your questions are probably better than my questions. So we will be covering the state of the current body-worn camera market, talking about police practices with body-worn cameras. The next section will be about what supports are out there for using body-worn cameras, and this is really the shiny objects that are coming out to support body-worn cameras. And then we'll have a very focused session on the questions, hopefully, and then provide our contact information. So that's how the session's going to go. Let me start with an introduction. So my name again is Shelley Solomon. I am the CEO of Justice and Security Strategies. I've been working with body-worn camera programs since 2015, when I was able to work with another panelist here and went out with LAPD officers before body-worn cameras were introduced and after they were introduced to see how the police-citizen interactions changed. After that, I've joined the technical assistance team and have been working with a number of agencies across the United States on the implementation of their programs. In terms of the panelists, we have Dr. Craig Uchida, who is the president and my boss at Justice and Security Strategies. He was in charge and led the evaluation of the body-worn camera program and the LAPD that I mentioned. He is a subject matter expert on body-worn cameras, working on the TTA program since 2015, and is currently leading the effort to determine how body-worn camera footage is used within police agencies and the criminal justice system. Sergeant Armand Lemoyne is from the LAPD. He is the officer in charge of the technical technologies section within the Innovations Management Division of the LAPD. So he's in a big department with a big name. He and his staff have overseen the deployment and use of the body-worn cameras since 2015. And his team has been responsible for training over 7,000 LAPD officers on the use and functionality of the cameras. So he'll be talking a lot about that. He's a 25-year veteran of the LAPD. Our last panelist is Mr. Elliot Harkavy. Elliot has a wealth of experience being a technology advisor. He has nearly 30 years of experience with Homeland Security, strategic planning, market strategy, competitive intelligence, IT planning, and operations improvement. So as I mentioned, he is a techie in the truest sense. He spent 4 years working for the Washington Metropolitan Council of Governments and with the Homeland Security Department as part of the FEMA operations on responding and recovering from public safety threats. He's worked with a lot of regional public safety committees and a lot of police departments across the nation. So the panelists I think we have can answer a lot of your questions about how the body-worn cameras have evolved over time. And so let's get to it. Let's ask our first question out there. Y'all ready for the lightning round? Here we go. So our first question is a really basic one. What is the current body-worn camera market? I'm an economist by training, so what do we need to know about the market today? And we'll start this off with Elliot, if you can give us like an overview of what do we know right now?
Well, the market's going to be very busy right now with the number of states passing police reform, and a lot of that police reform includes mandatory body-worn camera usage. So there is my own state, Maryland, just passed one that will be going into effect. I think it's got a fairly long transition period, but within a couple of years, every officer in the state of Maryland is going to be wearing body-worn cameras. I believe there's a similar bill in Delaware, and a number were passed earlier this year. New Mexico, I believe Colorado, and about a half dozen others. So the market's going to be quite busy. Now, in terms of the product that's available out there, a few years ago, let's say 6-7 years ago, body cameras were basically enhanced GoPros, basically just a simple camera. But now they're very sophisticated, bringing a lot of additional functionality to law enforcement officers. But as you said, many of those functions might be shiny objects if they're not part of the law enforcement strategy of your agency. So it's important to figure out what it is that you need and which vendor best meets that need.
So Armand, would you like to add a little bit from within the police department, what you're seeing and changes in the market and the evolution?
Well, I have noticed that, with the significance of body-worn footage, especially in the media today, it seems like there's going to be an increased desire, at least from a public perspective, for more agencies to take on body-worn cameras for increased transparency, for things of that nature. The public it seems to be becoming used to the fact that many police instances or incidents are being captured on body-worn video. So when they're not, I think that may raise some additional questions. So I see a shift potentially for more police agencies to move towards body-worn cameras. And as a result, I think more companies, if you will, are starting to produce more and more body-worn cameras and add those to the marketplace. They're kind of behind the power curve, if you will, trying to play catch up. So there are, to Elliot's point, there are a lot of options out there, and knowing what your agency needs before you actually purchase it is extremely important. Otherwise, you could waste a significant amount of money, right?
So a lot of these, if y'all could talk a little bit about how some of these items like camera mounting and battery life, we'll start off with you, Armand, and talk a little bit about how that's evolved as you've seen it.
So as far as mounting, our policy has remained the same. The camera must be forward facing, must be on the outermost garment, must be as close to center line as possible. And what's the last? And there's one more. I'll come back to that. The field of view has expanded just slightly. They were on our now third iteration of cameras. So the field of view has expanded about 3 degrees. Battery life is extremely significant. From our first iteration of the camera to the third, battery life has been extremely important. The first camera wouldn't make it through a 10 or 12-hour shift, which was extremely problematic. The second camera was better, but then towards its end of life, that battery deteriorated rather significantly, and again, wouldn't make it through an entire shift. This third iteration seems to be performing really well, and it is covering all aspects of recording and things like that. With the buffer, we started off with a 30-second pre-event with video only, no audio. But in the interest of trying to capture those events, the spontaneous events, like officer-involved shootings that happen at a moment's notice, and officers usually have to react first and then activate the camera later, 30 seconds just wasn't quite enough. So we have expanded that to 2 minutes, video only, no audio prior to every recording. And that's about it for now. Well,
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think at this point now I believe we have a poll at this point to ask you some questions out there. That is, are you in the process of buying cameras? And we'll let people take a minute to answer that, a second to answer that poll so that we can have some feedback on that.
While they're answering the poll, one thing I will say is that every one of those categories, except for battery life, there are trade-offs. Battery life, it's very clear. You want the longest battery life that you can get without making the camera too big and too heavy. But in terms of camera placement, there's a lot of debate that's gone on between the head mounted, which shows exactly what the officer is seeing, versus the body mounted, which is much more stable, gives a better picture, but could be obscured, especially if the officer is in a firing stance. So there were a lot of trade-offs. You know, the head mounted, I can't watch head mounted video because that gives me just the Blair Motion Project type sickness. But for some, that's, you know, there was actually a study done that focused basically on that technology to prove that it was the head mount was the best. And it does have certain advantages, but again, it's a trade-off. Field of vision, it's a trade-off because, you know, you want to capture as much as possible to get as much context as possible. But on the other hand, there's a lot of discussion. What if the camera shows more than the officer was able to see and shows something the officer, you know, off in the periphery that the officer wasn't able to see, but that's used in court to say, why didn't the officer see that thing in the periphery because it's on the video? Buffering, you know, I remember a case about 2-3 years ago in Des Moines. They were using a system that had a very long buffer in it, and the camera wasn't activated during an officer-involved shooting that the media picked up on and thought was bad until they were able to go into the camera, pull that buffer, and show that it was the scenario was fully justified. On the other hand, I've heard a story from one agency that went to a 2-minute buffer, and an officer got a call while he was in the bathroom and ran out of the bathroom without washing his hands to make the arrest and stop the incident that was fully in progress. And the defense attorney, to try to distract the jury, just kept focusing on that officer did not wash his hands. And that was just an embarrassment. It was, you know, not a pleasant situation for the agency or the officer, but it, you know, on the other hand, as Sergeant Lemoyne said, you know, that 2 minutes, if you're dealing with an officer involved shooting and it captures the incident, it's invaluable. So there are trade-offs, and I actually wrote a whole article on BWCTTA.com about that trade-off with the buffering. So, and whether you audio, also the trade-off on whether you include audio in that buffering or not. So,
thank you for that. So I'm gonna ask Craig now to give us our poll results, so we have some feedback on this.
So the first question we asked is, are you in the process of buying cameras? And 74% of you are. So I think that's good to know. 26% of you are not. I think one of the things I just want to mention here is that at the bottom here, you see this resource. This is a bit dated, but NIJ did publish a market survey of body-worn camera technologies. And in that, they've laid out a lot of these issues. So if you are in the process of purchasing, take a look at this. It does unfortunately need to be updated a bit, but it does raise the kinds of questions and does provide, I hope, some answers for you in terms of the technology that's out there. There's also a question here about requiring officers to use a specific mount. And so I don't know, Armand, if you want to answer that question, do your cops, you know, require a specific mount, or what's the policy, or what's the practice, I guess, in LAPD?
So the short answer is yes, we've always required a specific mount, but those mounts have changed over the years. The initial one was a belt mounted mount. And what was quickly discovered was that it cut off the head. And so the framing was never quite right. The second mount was actually a clip that fit right over the top button of the uniform shirt. So it kind of snugged itself in there. And depending on the stature of the officer, the ballistic vest and so forth, a lot of times that camera was angled upward to the sky. And so again, you'd miss the hands of the person the police were contacting at the moment. So that didn't work out too well either. Finally, not finally, but we moved to chest mounted mounts. The first of which was a magnetic mount, which, as I see in one of the comments over here, we had some issues with that falling off, particularly during use of force incidents, but also exiting the vehicle, hitting the door, seatbelt snagging on it, things of that nature would just pop the thing right off. And so we have recently shifted to it's called a wing clip. It is not a magnetic mount. One piece still goes inside the uniform shirt, the other piece outside. They cinch together, and then you snap down the two pieces on the side. So it's much more secure. And then we also authorized a heavy duty magnet mount, which is very strong, but that's designed for jackets and thicker clothing. But yes, those are required. So currently it's only those two, that wing clip and the heavy duty, that we are authorized to use right now.
Thank you. So there's an evolution start there that we've seen over time. I know
my suggestion is that every agency try out, work with their vendor, try out what their options are. Some have great magnetic mounts, some have awful ones, some have great Molly mounts, some have awful ones. So it really is what your vendor offers, and also what your uniform can support, because different uniforms support different mounts.
Okay, I'm going to move us along because I know cost considerations are a big deal and everybody wants to know about that. So we're going to move through this because we have a lot of ground to cover here. So let's have Armand talk a little bit about what goes into these cost considerations, because these are things in your budget as you're buying now. A lot of you are buying. So just jump through this and talk about it.
Shelley, I fear I'm going to scare people off when I tell them what we pay. Now, keep in mind, we do have a very large agency. And so our cost is extremely high, relatively speaking. So I will distill it down to say that what we have in our package, and I'll tell you what that is in a moment, is approximately $1,800 per officer annually. But that's all things included. So that includes in that 3 cameras per contract, and that's 5 years. So 3 versions as they come out. Unlimited storage, cloud storage, that is. And replacement of any defective or bad order cameras when they become defective or malfunction or damaged in any way. We just send those back to the manufacturer and they swap them out. So all of those things are included, plus the licensing, access to the actual, database or the system. In this case, for us, it's evidence.com. So access to that and the licenses to use that as well. So all encompassing is about $1,800 per year. I can actually speak on the on-premise if you're considering that. We do use on-premise for our in-car video. And I know this isn't about in-car video, but for comparison's sake, for us, on-premise storage is unsustainable. It does, sometimes it's cheaper to manage your own. But for us, and this kind of ties into retention, I know we haven't gotten there yet, but we don't really delete anything. So our storage just increases without end. And so an on-premise solution really just wasn't the right thing for us. If you're deleting your data, then that may not be such a big issue, but you will have to maintain it on-premise, which is good or bad, depending on the size of your agency. Something to consider.
And I think at this point, we have another poll for you guys out there. And that is, have you already made the decision about what camera you will purchase? Just so we have a good sense of that. And we're going to move on to a little bit more deep discussion about, you brought up storage. But so when you consider, you talked a little bit about this, Armand. I don't know if you want to add anything about the different issues with the storage of the cloud versus the server.
Well, so as I mentioned, the biggest issue is because we have a tendency not to delete things, that unlimited storage comes in handy. Additionally, because we have unlimited storage, our system has allowed us to kind of consolidate a lot of things in one location. So not only do we have our body worn video there, we also have audio files, which come from our communications division. We have images, which officers are capturing in the field and then uploading into the same place. And then more recently, documents, right? So arrest reports and things like that are also being added to the same location, which is great for the kind of one-stop shop for investigators or detectives to actually package that up and share it with the district or city attorneys.
Great. So I'll let Craig share the poll results.
Have you already made decisions about the camera you will purchase? So 84% of you have said yes. And only 16% of you have said no. It's good to know. I hope you all have made good, solid decisions. If you have not made decisions yet, please look at the market survey. Please look at there's another slide that's coming up about generic RFPs. So I hope that will be helpful to you. Go ahead, Shelley.
We'll move to that. So our last poll question is, have you made decisions about storage? So if we can pop that question up, let people answer it while we go to the next slide, and let Craig talk a little bit about the guidance for purchasing.
So one of the things we did a few years ago was put together a generic request for proposals. So for those of you who haven't decided yet and need to go through the procurement process to purchase your cameras, this generic request just provides you with an overview. It provides you with specific language that you might want to use in your RFP. It goes through and lays out, frankly, very specific kinds of things you might want to ask, both in an RFP and also just in any conversations with vendors. I think that's the helpful part of it. And it gives you some guidance about the kinds of questions to ask and things like that. One of the things I'd say, yes, it's just a model. It's just to assist you in the process. It's not definitive. It doesn't replace any of the federal, state, or local requirements, because each of you may have your own local requirements. The grants do have specific requirements that they want to urge and mandate and do. And so you do have to follow some of the procurement rules that these grants do cover. But this does give you some indication of what to do. So I'm looking at the latest poll results. Have you made decisions about storage? 92% of you have done so, and 8% of you have not. So most of you clearly know what you want and know what direction you're going.
And I would say, yesterday you had your session with the federal procurement process by the BJA folks. So if you missed that session, you can go back to that, but that is available. So now we're going to move to the second half of our focus, and that is in the next slide. What are the police practices and experiences with body-worn cameras? At this point, we're going to go ahead to that next slide and say, what have we learned about the body-worn camera technology over the last 7 years? And I'm going to ask you guys to kind of do that generally, then come back to you and ask you what was the one key thing that you've learned. So if we could start that, Elliot, if you could say a little bit about that to start with.
I mean, one key thing is, as Chief Acevedo said the other day, is, what happens if you have a critical incident and you don't have it, or you don't have the video, or you have the camera but don't have the video from that incident. And that's something that that is just, you can't, these days you can't live without it. I've heard that some courts and some advocates are saying if the video is not there, it didn't happen, much like it used to be, if it's not in your notebook, it didn't happen. So basically it's essential. But as we've as the technology is developed, it's also given you the ability to use a handheld device, a phone or a tablet or computer, to do all the tagging and all the notations so that the video is properly handled, and if it's evidentiary, properly used as evidence. The ability to better facilitate audits so that you have better monitoring on your officers. I believe there was a high-profile case in LA where an officer, where just a horrendous thing came up in an audit, and that was able to be addressed before even worse things happened from that officer. So while it was, not a pleasant thing, at least it was discovered before worse things happened. So those are some key things that have just absolutely made this technology essential, and the proper use of it essential.
So Armand, if you could talk about it a little bit from the camera point of view and the technology and how that's changed and things you've learned about it. I know you've learned a lot.
Indeed. So over the last 7 years, that body-worn camera technology has advanced exponentially. So I would, and in fact, the camera technology has advanced faster than our needs as a department have. So I would charge any department to beware of the shiny object, right? Because there's a lot of technology out there that just is amazing and it looks great. But does your department really need it? And will you really utilize it? Is it worth the cost, right? So these are things to consider. The cameras we have now have some amazing functionality. But when it comes to actually benefiting from that technology as a department and what it would cost to do so, it's, the numbers don't quite add up. There are a handful of use cases where that would be, some of these features would be wonderful, but at what cost, right? So things to consider. Try on the pair of shoes, right, before you buy them. Think about the technology. How would you actually apply that to your department? And if you can't come up with an answer, then maybe you don't really need that, right?
Thank you. Craig?
One of the things I would also keep in mind is that, technology does change very quickly, as Armand just mentioned. LAPD's on their third iteration of cameras in 6 years. So that means the technology moves forward, every couple of years. So, you need to keep that in mind as you go through and negotiate with vendors and deal with these things as well. The second thing I'd say too is that the policies that go with your technology are going to evolve a bit. I think we've seen some of that as well. And Elliot alluded to it in terms of releasing video and things like that are become part of the change that has happened and that we've seen. I think the other things too that have evolved are, and I hope that this is true in most places, is the awareness that the cameras and the footage itself is not going to answer every question about everything. That it's not going to show you the finite details of things that we see on TV or in a TV show or a movie. It just doesn't work that way. And I think we've learned too that the expectations for body-worn camera footage need to be tempered, that it isn't the silver bullet. And even though, courts are saying, yeah, if you need the footage, et cetera, it's not always going to be there. And it's not always going to show you exactly what, the sequence of events or anything else. So I think that's important for people to recognize as well.
Excellent points, gentlemen. Thank you. So now we're going to move on to the next slide. And these are the supports for body-worn cameras. And these are the shiny objects. And so in this slide, we have a lot to cover. So I'm going to ask y'all some individual questions as you go through this. And we're going to start with Armand talking a little bit about this computer-aided dispatch link up. So if you could talk about that.
Yeah, as a department, we're really excited about the integration with our CAD system. We've been working on it for about 10 years. So we have struggled with this, not because the vendors haven't been extremely helpful. It's because, a lot of our systems and security nannies and things like that are kind of one-off and customized. And to integrate that with any vendor's product has been challenging. So we are not there yet. We are still actively working on that. That would certainly help out tremendously with identifying body-worn video and relieving the officers of having to do so in the field. One less thing they would have to do, but we're still working with that. It's been hard for us.
Okay. And Elliot, if you could talk a little bit, I know you wanted to talk about our webinar with respect to this, but also the automatic triggers and what the status of that is.
Yeah, just very, very quickly on the CAD. There is a webinar that we did about a year or two ago, and there are some agencies who have got it right and get the 90+% integration, but they've invested a lot in both their CAD and in their coding so that the codes match up. Automated triggers is something that many agencies swear by, and many agencies don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. When they work, they work. Sometimes they don't, or sometimes they automatically trigger cameras that weren't part of the incident, especially in a dense urban area where an incident may be occurring just a few hundred yards from where a patrol officer is walking a beat. On the other hand, as Chief Acevedo said, you don't want to take the chance of that incident happening and the camera's not on. Now, some agencies have come up with some manual alternatives to the automated triggers, like having the dispatchers just constantly repeating, "Is your camera on?" Not as elegant, but for some agencies, it has worked. So there's a trade-off, and an article that I wrote about this was just posted into the chat. So if anyone wants to look at that in more detail, please read that article. Transmission. Okay, I'm sorry.
So Craig, I know you have us deep in this transmission of footage to other criminal justice agencies. So if you want to take that on and a little bit
Sure,
about.
I do want to mention something about computer-aided dispatch integration, though. One of the things, and Armand alluded to this too, is that it's not just a matter of saying, yeah, let's link our CAD system to body-worn camera footage. I think there is a lot of work involved in making sure that the codes that you want to match, and the types of incidents and the categorization of those incidents match as well. And it isn't going to be the complete answer again about the specific incident. So you need to keep those kinds of things in mind as you go forward. And with respect to transmission of footage to other agencies, as I mentioned in the earlier session that we did on digital evidence management, we're working with police agencies to transmit the footage and others to prosecutors and other law enforcement agencies. One of the things that may happen with a number of smaller agencies is that you may end up burning footage to DVDs or CDs, and that may be unavoidable just because you don't have the capacity to use the cloud, or you've gone with an on-prem kind of solution. That's all fine, well, and good, but it is time consuming. I will say that there is a cost with it as well. I know that this is one of the things that has evolved over time, however, and that most agencies are going to either emailing or having a secure line to transmit, and that's going to be far better. With prosecutors, it's going to depend on the jurisdiction and what their policies are for accepting footage along with an arrest or along with other types of information too. So I would strongly suggest working with your prosecutors, making sure that you're in agreement with what their needs are, as well as what you can provide to them, because I know Armand has stories about that with respect to the city attorney, as well as with the district attorney, that, it again depends on the kind of charge. It depends on the office and what their policies are going to be in accepting footage as evidence. And Armand, I don't know if you want to touch on that, but you should actually.
Well, so it helps if all of the entities you want to share with use the same system that you do, which may or may not be the case. The current system that we use makes it extremely easy to share, which has not, well, that has been a pain point with the district and city attorney, because they have very specific ways they want things delivered and identified. And the city attorney is very different from the district attorney. So you share one to the DA, they want this, they want A, the city attorney wants B. And so the different formats and things make it problematic potentially. The other part is when it comes to sharing with other like law enforcement agencies, again, the system facilitates that. It makes it very easy, but we don't really have any rules governing that, which is why we don't currently do it. Because if you open that door, then anyone, anywhere can share with any agency, anytime, under any circumstances, which could certainly be problematic. Are you authorized to do that, right? Should you be doing that? Are you giving it to the right person, and for the right reason? So currently, all of our sharing with other agencies and outside entities, aside from the DA and CA, go through our legal affairs division discovery section until we can get something in place that says, here are the rules for sharing within this environment.
So I know these last three are pain points for a lot of folks. So, but they're also, emerging technologies that are pretty shiny. So I don't know if one of y'all wants to take on these last three quickly so we can get to some questions and have time for questions. But
I'll say a few key things. All three platforms, whether it's an analytics platform, a redaction platform, or digital evidence integration platform, these are very much evolving technologies that a few years ago, they were more vapor than reality. But for example, in redaction, where it used to be using the automated redaction tools might not be worth the time because they left so much unredacted that you still had to go through the entire manual redaction process. Now the tools are good enough that you, for the most part, may only need to do a manual review and fix a few frames out of a 10-minute video. So that's definitely improving. And part of what's helping it improve are the improving analytic and artificial intelligence capabilities. The digital evidence integration tools are certainly improving. A couple of years ago, there really wasn't much out there other than using your vendor's software as your framework for digital evidence integration. Now, there are some tools out there. They seem to be fairly expensive and not well, the tires haven't been kicked well, if you might say. Definitely make sure that you know what you're getting into if you decide that you want to go that way. But it's definitely getting there. In terms of the transmission, the one thing that I will say is that if your prosecutor or your partners are asking for physical media as opposed to exchange of links, definitely track the economic cost of that, because we've heard from some agencies that once they were able to articulate that it costs X dollars more to burn the video rather than just send a link, they were able to convince their partner to accept the link. The other thing, one thing that was mentioned in the earlier presentation was link for submission. That's not a bad thing. The one thing I will say is that if your vendor is offering that, check to see what protections are in place to make sure that the video is checked for malware before it hits your system. So
good advice there.
thank you. So, well, we're going to go on.
Armand wanted to say something.
Real quick, I watching the time here, on video analytics and AI tools and things that are out there are amazing tools. And we were on track to start, to evaluate and start using some of those things until terms like facial recognition became bad words. So now it's dead in the water. And that's just one of those things we just cringe at now because of the implication and the perception of what it does, the big brother effect in this whole thing. So it's a shame because a lot of crimes could be solved, and they're very helpful tools. As far as redaction, I will tell you this, that if you take on body worn cameras and you've never had them before, soon thereafter, you will be forced, I don't want to use the word forced, but you will be releasing body worn video. And redaction comes along with that, and it is an absolute nightmare because the man hours required for redaction are tremendous. And especially when you're on the clock to reduce or to release video within a specified amount of time, that means all of the redaction has to take place within that time. License plates, people's faces, officers' names, whatever the case may be, all of those things have to be meticulously removed or blurred out or whatever, and someone has to actually do that. So take that into consideration, especially if you're talking that over with your oversight committee or whoever that is that dictates that you have to release video. Let them know that, this redaction process is going to take time. It's going to cost money. You're going to need additional bodies to do it and so forth. And that needs to be factored in.
So if we go to that next slide, I just want to bring this to your attention. The next slide, we have a set of resources that are available. I know y'all are really an advanced crew here based on the poll questions. You're ahead of it, but these are some resources that I would highly recommend. You can go back to the slideshow and look at just to make sure you've got a lot covered, especially on some of these shiny objects. So please know these are available to you and you can use them. And I am one of these people who keeps us on track. So if we go to the next slide, I have given y'all some time to ask some questions. Armand knows this. He's very well trained. He's been on many of my sessions and I've kept them together. So please feel free to raise questions. I think we had some raised.
Yeah,
I noticed two. I'm sorry, Greg.
No, I'll just read them and you guys can answer them. How's that? So the first one, and this has been answered by John Markovic. Has any agency used a federal grant towards the costs of licensing? And John responded, yes, licensing costs are allowable for federal grants, and a number of agencies have included those in their grant budgets. Another question is, what experience do you have with additional tech that would support body-worn camera usage, such as cell phones? So Armand, do you want to take that one on?
Sure. If I can just add something on the federal grant thing.
Oh, sure.
Because we got a couple of grants, and yes, while you can apply that to the licensing and things like that, it's also important to remember those costs are continuing. So if the grant gives you a fixed amount of money, which is wonderful, but at the end of when that money runs out, your department's on the hook for the remainder, right? Perpetually. So just something to consider. Grant money is a wonderful thing, but it's easy to forget that after that money is used up, that you now have to find that in your budget. Food for thought. The cell phone thing, wow, yes. We had, there's a little feedback. We were in charge of body-worn cell phones. So every officer, that's about 7,000 that had a body-worn camera, also had a cell phone. We managed those as well. I could go on for about 90 minutes on this, but it is challenging because cell phones, little computers, basically have their glitches, have their, little eccentricities, if you will, right? And they are notoriously difficult to troubleshoot when it comes to fixing issues and things like that, and managing devices like that. And then the life expectancy is very short, right? 2 years really, and then those phones are, approaching worthlessness. But yes, we have dealt with that. They are an excellent tool. because at least with our company, they do offer mobile applications, which make it exceptionally easy for officers in the field to actually facilitate viewing videos, tagging them, or adding identifiers and categorizing and things like that. And instead of having to go back to the station, log onto a computer and do so. So that was wonderful and still is. And we are still trying to move ahead with that technology. And then it opens the door to all sorts of other things outside the realm of body-worn cameras, right? When you have a mobile device now, you can talk about web access and all sorts of things like that, which is wonderful, assuming it doesn't interfere with, tactics and things like that.
Thank you. So I'm gonna, oh, go ahead, Kurt.
The use of or the need for a cell phone for many of the vendors really does open up a whole lot of technologies, and not just with the BWC, but also with your CAD. And I believe that some of the cell phone vendors are now offering devices that you could have the cell phone with a device replace your mobile mobile computer unit. So just something to consider. Some of the BWC vendors are actually arranging for cell phones or arranging for a deactivated cell phone that could be used like an iPod or small tablet as well for some of that functionality if you don't want to actually issue cell phones. So just discuss it with your vendor if that's a concern.
Okay, so thank you, gentlemen. As we head into closing remarks, I just want to put up the next slide so people could capture this. Here is the contact information for everybody. If you were shy about asking your questions, you are welcome to email these individuals and do follow up, and they will respond to you. And if there are closing remarks that we have another question that's been asked here, but I will.
There's one question here that just came in. Did you see an impact to your internet bandwidth or for video uploads? And Armand, I know you're smiling there, but because you were in charge of installation of the body-worn cameras back in the day, and had a direct impact. It had a direct impact on you personally to do all those things. So briefly, just answer that. Go ahead.
So the short answer is yes. But then again, we do have a very large department, right? With, at least 7,000 cameras, right? All, vying for attention on the network. So we have had, some intermittent outages and things like that in the past. Actually, we've done very well lately. Our network has done exceedingly well. And I will say this, as technology improves, so our second camera, if I may, the second camera didn't have brains, so to speak. The brains were in the docks that were attached to the wall. And at any given station for us, we'd have about 40 docks. With the new camera, the cameras actually have brains. Each camera has its own brain. The dock does not. So now we went from 1 IP address per dock to 8 IP addresses per dock, times 40. So you can imagine how many devices or how many IP addresses are now struggling for attention on our network. So we had to make some serious changes, add an additional subnet and things like that to make sure that all the traffic didn't get lost. So that was an interesting undertaking. And so these are the things that you certainly want to sit down with your IT experts and discuss prior to implementation, right? What is going to be required? Can our system handle it? Do we need to increase our system? Do we need more support? Do we need more hardware and things like that? Because what you don't want is to set up your system and find out it can't, it can't cope. And then everything just basically falls apart. So that has been the most challenging part of the setup. Once you get it set up, you're good to go. But it is a long road indeed, getting that established.
Well, that is great.
It's not uncommon to need to upgrade the internet feed to your facilities, as well as the electricity to your facilities, to manage the body-worn cameras. So if your buildings are old, that's a likely scenario. If your buildings are new and up to the latest standards, you may not. But as you said, with units with a brain, now the upload doesn't only occur in the dock, it occurs throughout the office if the office is Wi-Fi, or the station if the station is Wi-Fi enabled, or potentially from the vehicle, from the cruiser if the cruiser is enabled with internet. So,
Well, on that mind-bending, brain exploding moment, we'll go into total closing remarks here and allow, I don't know if anyone has any final remarks, Craig, if otherwise.
Maybe John Markovic, you want to say a few words?
I'm just figuring out I'm just
There you go.
figuring out how to mute myself. I think everything was really relevant and covered well. It's a little unfortunate that the market survey is not up to date. I mean, there are those standard features for those of you, I guess it's a few of you who are still looking to choose your camera, that you need to look at it. As Elliot mentioned, or somebody mentioned, battery life is key. The field of vision, the field of view is important for a variety of reasons, but I think pay attention if you are still looking to purchase to the fundamentals, and then consider the shiny objects afterwards. And remember what was said in the procurement webinar or session yesterday, just in terms of those of you still moving forward with your purchase, about the competition. So all of these features will affect price, and just be ready to discuss your justification of why you selected what you did, and what is the benefit of things. It's not just the lowest price, because the features are all different. So you can do your homework and due diligence in justifying what the costs are. And I think this session gave some good information on what to consider along those lines. There's no cookbook answer, but I think there are a lot of considerations that were framed well here that'll be helpful.
If I may, just one thing, do I have time, Shelley?
You do.
So, and John kind of, he made me remember this when we was talking about the shiny object thing, right? Because of body-worn technology has advanced so much, you can buy yourself a body-worn camera in 4K. Is that wise, right? When it comes to review, do you want a reviewer seeing something in 4K resolution when an officer can't see in that resolution, right? So to speak. So, consider what, kind of the real life perspective. And if the video is not really a real life perspective, then you have a disconnect when it comes to review, right? You watch a crystal clear video, you say, well, clearly that's a cell phone, not a gun. But is that what the officer saw, right? What were the conditions, under which the officer was viewing this instance? So, be careful with the ultra high resolution things, just something to consider. For an in-car video, maybe, but for body-worn video, I would probably discourage ultra high resolution. That's all.
On that note, I will let this go back to the break period. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll reach out for more information if you need it. Thank you, gentlemen.